Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we get into some really fascinating, sometimes pretty challenging sources you share with us.
Exactly.
And today, we are diving right into a theory that basically asks you to question, well, almost everything you learn about history.
That's a big one?
Yeah. What if Tamerlane, the Tamerlane, the fierce Mongol conqueror everyone pictures, what if he wasn't that at all? What if he was actually, get this, a red-haired European?
It definitely goes against the grain, doesn't it? And that's precisely the kind of thing our sources today are pushing.
Okay.
This whole deep dive centers on a theory, and honestly, it's pretty explosive. It comes from The Issue with Tamerlane by Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovskiy.
Right, part of that bigger series, History, Fiction, or Science, which is, well, controversial is putting it mildly.
Very mildly. So their core idea, they call it the New Chronology, or NC for short.
Okay.
And the claim is audacious. They're saying that a huge chunk of history as we know it, especially anything before the 17th century, it's not just got errors. No, they say it's basically a simulacrum, a fake, mostly cooked up in the 16th century.
Wow. I mean, just think about that. The foundations of our history, empires rising and falling, cultural shifts, all potentially just a story written a few hundred years ago.
That's the premise. It's definitely mind-bending. And they claim it's based on new empirico-statistical methods.
Statistics in history. Okay.
Exactly. And the authors, Fomenko and Nosovskiy, their backgrounds are in mathematics. Fomenko is an academician, doctor of physics and maths. Nosovskiy works in probability, statistics.
So they're applying mathematical models to historical texts.
That's the claim. They insist that every theory it contains, no matter how unorthodox, is backed by solid scientific data. That's a direct quote.
Okay, but we have to put a big asterisk here, right? For you listening, it's really important to know that the mainstream academic world, they generally see this new chronology as pseudo-history.
Absolutely. It's widely rejected by historians, but whether you buy into it or not, their arguments definitely force you to look at the past differently.
Yeah. And that's why we're diving in today. So let's start with the man himself, Tamerlane, or Timur, as he's also known.
Right at the heart of the puzzle.
Yeah. So most of us, we picture this, Central Asian Mongol warrior. But then there was this discovery in 1941. His grave was opened in Samarkand.
A pivotal moment, according to the authors.
What did they actually find? What did the forensic work show that just didn't fit the picture?
Well, the scientists involved, Academician Gerasimov, he did a skull reconstruction, and Fomenko and Nosovskiy highlight what they call the main enigmatic contradiction.
Which was?
That common knowledge said Timur was Mongol, absolutely, but lots of medieval sources actually described him as European.
So conflicting sources even back then.
Right. And Gerasimov's scientific method, using the skull, it produced a face that, according to the authors, was clearly European, convex profile, not flat.
Yeah.
They say Gerasimov himself was amazed.
Okay, so that puts Gerasimov in a really awkward spot. He's got scientific results pointing one way, accepted history pointing another.
Exactly. Fomenko and Nosovskiy call it a scientific Scylla and historical Charybdis. A real bind.
Scylla and Charybdis, yeah. Between a rock and a hard place.
Pretty much. He felt forced by his method to sculpt this European face, but at the same time, they say he tried to make the portrait look as Mongoloid as possible.
Trying to bridge the gap.
Or maybe, as they claim, try and make it fit the accepted narrative. They say he had to keep repeating, almost like a mantra, that the portrait looks Mongoloid, even when, to them, it was obviously not.
So he wouldn't discredit his own method within what they call Scaligian history, their term for conventional history.
Right. Their view is that conventional history is this rigid structure, and Gerasimov had to conform. They even point out, if you look at the reconstruction without the hat he added, the European features are much clearer.
Okay, that's the face. Were there other surprises from the skeleton?
Oh, yeah, quite a few. His height, for instance, estimated around 170 centimeters, about 5'7".
Which is
untypical for a Mongol, according to the book. And then the hair. This is striking.
What about it?
It was apparently thick and long, reddish-gray in color, with dark brown and red being the main shades. And his beard, also red, with a great deal of gray.
Red hair. Not exactly the image we have.
Not at all. And Gerasimov concluded the red was natural, not henna dye, like some historians apparently suggest.
Okay, so it's natural red hair.
Fomenko and Nosovskiy argue this finding just invalidates the efforts of traditionalist historians to evade the obvious.
And there was something about his age, too, wasn't there?
Yes. The skull and skeleton suggested a biological age of maybe 50 years old, maximum.
But historically, he is supposed to have died much older.
Yeah, around 70 or 72, so another discrepancy.
Okay, so we have a European-looking face, red hair,
Yeah.
taller than expected, maybe younger than recorded.
Yeah.
Quite a pile of contradictions. How does the new chronology make sense of this?
Their solution is, well, radical but simple within their framework. They redefine Mongol.
Redefine it. How?
Not as an ethnicity from modern Mongolia. For them, Mongol just means someone from the Great Empire.
And the Great Empire is?
They identify it as ancient Russia, or the Horde. So Timur the Mongol becomes simply Timur the Great, meaning Timur from the Great Empire.
So Mongol isn't about race, it's about political geography in their view.
Exactly. And they claim this neatly solves the dilemma. If the body in the tomb is Timur, then according to the physical evidence, he was a red-haired European from the Great Empire.
And if it's not Timur?
Then conventional history, which insists it is his grave, has a major problem. Either way, they argue the standard story is compromised.
Okay, so this redefinition of Tamerlane, of Mongol, it's really just the starting point for a much bigger overhaul of history, isn't it? Especially Russian and Oriental history.
Absolutely. It's the first domino, if Mongol isn't an ethnicity from the East.
And who are the Mongols and Tartars who feature so heavily in Russian history, the Golden Horde and all that?
According to the new chronology, they were Cossacks, or the regular Russian army, also known as the Horde.
Wait, the Mongols were Russians. The invaders were the regular army.
That's the claim. Tamerlane the Mongol would then be, effectively, a Cossack warlord, a leader within this Russian horde. It completely flips the script on invasions and foreign rule.
Okay, my head's starting to spin a bit.
Yeah.
What about all the names and titles, like Padishah, Emir? They sound distinctly, well, Oriental or Middle Eastern.
Fomenko and Nosovskiy argue that those names fostered a misleading Oriental impression. They say the language and titles don't necessarily mean a foreign origin in the way we assume.
And they get specific about places too, right?
Like Samarkand.
Can't.
Very specific. They claim Timur's famous capital, Samarkand, wasn't originally the city in modern Uzbekistan. They propose it was initially Samara, a city on the Volga River in Russia.
Samara. How do they justify that leap?
Through linguistic analysis, partly. They suggest reading Samarkand as Aramas in the Arabic style, which they connect to Rome or simply capital.
A bit convoluted, maybe?
It's definitely unconventional.
They go further.
They look at historical descriptions of Samarkand having satellite settlements named after other famous capitals, Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad, and they argue this points to Samarkand being an alias not for Samara, but for Constantinople in the 15th century, that it was the great capital being referenced.
So Samarkand could be Samara, or it could be Constantinople. It feels like names and places are shifting all over the map.
It does create that impression, and this leads to another huge claim. Many famous wars weren't between distinct nations or invaders.
They were internal conflicts?
Yes, like the famous wars between Timur and Toktamish. We learn about them as clashes between major powers, maybe the Timurids versus the Golden Horde.
Right.
But the new chronology says, nope, this was an internal conflict in the Russian Horde, basically a Russian civil war.
And they identify these figures with Russian historical figures.
They do. Toktamish Khan, they claim, is actually Dmitry Donskoy, the famous Russian prince who defeated the Tartars at Kulikovo Field in conventional history.
So the guy fighting the Horde is the Horde leadership.
In their model, yes. And Urs Khan, another figure from that era, is identified as the Russian Khan, ruler of the White Horde, which they link to Western Russia or Lithuania.
It turns everything inside out. Foreign invasions become civil wars, enemy Khans become Russian princes.
It fundamentally redraws the map and the narrative of that entire period. External threats become internal power struggles within this vast Russian horde.
Okay, if redefining entire peoples and relocating capitals wasn't mind-bending enough, this next bit from Fomenko and Nosovskiy really takes the cake. They talk about phantom figures.
Ah, yes, the duplicates, historical echoes.
It's like history is full of ghosts, or maybe just carbon copies. What's the idea here? Are they saying major historical figures are just repeats of each other?
Essentially, yes. They argue that the historical record we have is filled with duplicates, the same person or event appearing multiple times under different names in different centuries.
Why would that happen?
Their explanation is that the timeline of history has been artificially stretched. What was actually a much shorter period, maybe just a few centuries, got expanded by chroniclers, creating these phantom reflections.
Okay, give me an example. Who's a phantom reflection of Tamerlane?
Well, one of the most startling claims is that Tamerlane, or Timur, who they also equate with the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II.
The conqueror of Constantinople.
That same Mehmed II. They claim this 15th century figure served as the prototype for the biography of the much earlier ancient Alexander the Great.
Wait, Alexander the Great is a copy of Tamerlane Mehmed II.
That's their assertion. They point to a text called The Anonymous Tale of Iskander, Iskander being the Eastern name for Alexander, and claim it's actually a primary source describing Timur.
That's a huge claim. How do they connect these dots across more than 1,000 years of supposed history?
They bring in figures like Cardinal Bessarion. He was a real 15th century scholar who fled Constantinople when Mehmed II conquered it.
Okay, a contemporary of Mehmed Tamerlane.
Right, and according to Fomenko and Nosovskiy, Bessarion himself noted in his writings the obvious parallels between the ancient wars of Alexander and the 15th century campaigns of the Ottomans, meaning Mehmed II.
So Bessarion saw parallels. Does that mean he fabricated Alexander?
Fomenko and Nosovskiy take it much further. They suggest Bessarion might have actually written or heavily edited the works attributed to the ancient Greek orator Demosthenes, deliberately superimposing 15th century events onto a supposedly ancient past.
Wow. So a key figure in preserving classical texts might have been inventing them, or at least radically reshaping them.
That's the implication within their theory. It's a radical reinterpretation of how classical history was transmitted or perhaps created.
And Alexander the Great isn't the only echo they find. Are there other alleged duplicates of Tamerlane?
Oh, plenty. They suggest Tamerlane also shows up as Alexis Komnenos, a Byzantine emperor supposedly from the 11th century.
Another one.
Yep. And Genghis Khan's other name, Temujin, they see that as just another version of Timur.
Timur.
Yeah.
The names are similar, I guess.
They lean heavily on those kinds of similarities. They also identify Mahmud Ghaznavi, a ruler usually placed in the 11th century, as another phantom of Timur, or as they sometimes call him, Mehmet the Cossack.
Mehmet the Cossack.
Yeah.
It connects back to that idea of the Horde being Russian Cossacks.
Exactly. It's all interwoven. A figure like Timur isn't just one person in the 14th, 15th century. His story, they claim, is scattered across the timeline under different aliases.
Okay, this is really challenging stuff. And it doesn't stop with conquerors and emperors, does it? They draw parallels with Russian czars, even biblical figures.
It stretches incredibly far. They look at the Russian Grand Prince Ivan III, who was a contemporary of Mehmed II in the 15th century, and they say his life has many parallels with Tamerlane's story.
Okay, same era, maybe plausible parallels, but biblical figures.
That's where it gets even more controversial. They link an Archbishop John associated with Tamerlane to John the Bishop, or Presbyter Johannes, Prester John, from stories about Genghis Khan.
Prester John, the legendary Christian king in the East.
Right. And Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson who invaded Russia, they identify him as Ivan Kalita, a 14th century Grand Prince of Moscow. They even connect Kalita, meaning money bag, to the title Caliph.
Kalita, Caliph, wow.
And it keeps going. Ivan the Terrible, the famous Tsar. They argue he's not one person, but a palatian, a composite figure made from several different rulers.
A composite, okay. And the most extreme parallels.
Probably their claims linking Jesus Christ to the Byzantine Emperor Andronikos Turcomenos from the 12th century.
Jesus as a Byzantine emperor.
That's one of their most widely cited and criticized identifications. And King Solomon, they equate him with Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman ruler from the 16th century.
Solomon as Suleiman. Okay. So it's not just rewriting history. It's collapsing it drastically. Kings, conquerors, czars, sultans, even religious figures, all potentially reflections of just a few core stories from a much later period than we think.
That's the essence of the phantom duplicates idea. It underpins their entire argument for a radically shortened chronology.
All right, so we've seen how they challenge individual biographies, create these phantom duplicates, but they also tackle broader themes, right? Like religion, Tamerlane's faith, for example.
Absolutely. This is another area where they find, let's say, ambiguities that they use to support their theories. Tamerlane is usually considered a pretty fervent Muslim conqueror.
Yeah, that's the standard picture.
Yeah.
Built mosques, waged holy wars.
Right. But Fomenko and Nosovskiy question this simple label. They point out something interesting. Some Muslim sources from that period apparently referred to Orthodox Christian Russians as true believers.
Really? Orthodox Christians called true believers by Muslims?
According to the authors, yes. This leads them to suggest that the clear dividing lines we see today between Orthodox Christianity, Islam, and Catholicism, maybe they weren't so clear back then.
When do they think the split really happened?
They propose it might have been much later, maybe as late as the 15th or 16th century. They even theorize that Islam, in Timur's time, might have been practiced in ways much closer to Orthodox Christian rites.
How so?
They have this idea that Islam actually originated as the Nestorian branch of the Orthodox Church. So initially, it was just a variation within a broader Christian sphere in their view.
That's a major rethinking of religious history.
Hmm.
Do they offer specific evidence related to Tamerlane himself that contradicts the staunch Muslim image?
They do. They cite anecdotes from a contemporary chronicler, Foma of Metsop.
Okay.
Foma apparently described instances where Timur spared Christians while executing others. Or another time, Timur supposedly heard cries from a minaret, but interpreted them in a Christian context. Little details like that.
Anything else?
Yes, the issue of wine. They state it's a known fact that the modern Muslim tradition strictly forbids the ingestion of wine.
Right, that's generally understood.
Yet they say numerous sources claim that Timur's army drank wine in abundance. If his army is drinking freely, does that fit the image of a strictly Muslim force?
It certainly raises a question. And his burial.
Also flagged by the authors, they mention mourning rites and pagan decorations used at his burial, which they claim were in total defiance of the Muslim tradition.
So, ambiguous religious identity, wine drinking, non-standard burial. What's the bigger picture they're painting here about religion and empires?
It all feeds into their core idea of a single, unified empire encompassing regions we now think of as distinct. They argue these religious ambiguities support the claim that Russia and Turkey had been parts of a single state known as the Great Mongolian Empire up until the 7th century.
Russia and Turkey as one empire until the 1600s.
That's their radical proposition. They suggest that the later Romanov czars, after they came to power, deliberately created the narrative of perpetual religious conflict with Turkey.
Why would they do that?
To justify wars against Turkey, which, according to Fomenko and Nosovskiy, had previously been an ally or part of the same imperial structure. They claim the Romanovs framed their expansionist wars as liberation of fellow believers to mask political motives.
So history rewritten for political gain. Again, they must point to shared symbols too, if these empires were supposedly linked.
Definitely. They make a big deal about the star and crescent symbol.
Which today is strongly associated with Islam and Turkey.
Exactly. But they point out it was originally the symbol of Constantinople, or Tsarograd as it was known in Slavic. And crucially, they say this symbol appears on old coats of arms of the Russian cities, like Kostroma and Urals.
The star and crescent on Russian coats of arms.
That's what they claim. They call it Christian-Ottoman symbolism, arguing it shows a shared Christian-Ottoman past. They even trace it forward, seeing echoes on things like the spire of Moscow State University, the old USSR emblem, maybe even the hammer and sickle.
Wow, okay,
Yeah.
Connecting ancient symbols to Soviet iconography is quite a leap.
It is, but it fits their narrative of deep historical continuity and shared heritage between Russia and the Ottoman world. They also cite a 16th century account by Baron Sigismund Herberstein,
Who was he?
an Austrian diplomat who visited Moscow. He apparently described the official title of the Muscovite Tsar being written inside a complex diagram, a triple circle.
Okay.
And according to Herberstein, as relayed by the authors, the second circle contained the title of the Turkish Emperor and the phrase, "to our beloved brother."
To our beloved brother. Implying.
A very close relationship, perhaps a federation between the Russian Tsar and the Turkish Sultan in the 16th century. Not the animosity we usually assume.
Any other shared customs?
They mention descriptions of ceremonial clothing at Timur's court resembling the ceremonial attire of the Russian kings.
Little details, again, used to argue for a unified imperial culture that spanned both Russia and the Ottoman sphere.
It's a completely different world map, a completely different flow of history they're presenting. Unified empires, shared symbols, fluid religious identities.
It's a radical reconstruction, built piece by challenging conventional interpretations of names, dates, symbols, and texts.
Okay. We've spent a good amount of time laying out the claims of the new chronology. You've heard the arguments about Tamerlane, the phantom duplicates, the redefined empires, the shared symbols. It's complex, it's detailed, it's a lot.
It definitely is. An intricate web. But now we absolutely have to turn to the other side. What does mainstream scholarship, the historians, the archaeologists, the scientists, what do they say about all this?
Well, to put it bluntly, the reaction from the mainstream academic world is overwhelmingly negative.
So not just disagreement, but rejection.
Yes. The new chronology is widely rejected by mainstream historians. It's generally labeled as pseudoscientific and seen as completely inconsistent with absolute and relative dating techniques used across multiple scientific fields.
Okay, let's break that down. What are the specific criticisms of Fomenko's methods? They claim to use statistics, for example.
Right, the statistical correlation of texts and dynasties is one of their key methods, but critics say it's very rough.
Rough how?
They argue Fomenko engages in selective parsing and blending of the dates, events, and individuals. Essentially, critics accuse him of cherry-picking data.
So manipulating the inputs to get the desired output.
That's the accusation. They say he's rearranging, merging, and removing monarchs as needed to fit the pattern. This, critics argue, creates artificial, better-than-chance correlations. They look statistically significant, but only because the data was allegedly massaged beforehand.
Okay, that's the statistics. What about their use of astronomy? They claim astronomical data supports their shortened timeline.
Yes, particularly their analysis of things like eclipse records or star catalogs, like Ptolemy's Almagest. But here, too, critics accuse them of being highly selective.
Ignoring data that doesn't fit.
That's the claim. Critics say they ignore large bodies of data, specifically things like Babylonian astronomical diaries, which contain eclipse records going way back.
And those records support.
They consistently support the conventional chronology, back to at least 600 BCE, according to mainstream researchers. Fomenko's specific dating of the Almagest, which he places much later than antiquity, is also heavily criticized.
Why is that flawed, according to critics?
They argue he makes arbitrary choices about which stars to include in his analysis and uses incorrect assumptions about astronomical factors, like the Earth's obliquity, its axial tilt, which changes slowly over time. Get that wrong, and your date calculations will be way off.
So, selective data and flawed assumptions, according to the critics. What about the dating methods historians and archaeologists rely on every day? Carbon dating, tree rings.
This is a huge point of contention. The new chronology basically dismisses them all.
All of them. Archaeological dating based on strata.
Dismissed. Dendrochronology tree ring dating. They reject it, even though there are independent tree ring sequences going back over 12,000 years in some places, providing incredibly precise dates.
Wow. What else? Paleography studying ancient handwriting styles? Numismatics, dating based on coins?
Paleography, dismissed. Numismatics, they call it circular reasoning, assuming the dates of rulers to date the coins that then prove the dates of rulers.
The big one, radiocarbon dating.
They claim carbon dating is fundamentally flawed, inaccurate, non-exact. They even suggest there's undue cooperation between physicists doing the dating and archaeologists providing the samples, implying collusion to get the right dates.
So they're essentially rejecting the foundations of modern archaeological and historical dating science.
Pretty much. And from the mainstream perspective, this is a massive red flag. These methods, while they have error ranges and require careful application, are independently validated and cross-corroborated. Rejecting them all wholesale looks like rejecting any evidence that contradicts the preconceived theory.
This leads to perhaps their most controversial claim of all, the grand conspiracy. What are they alleging happened?
This is the idea that underpins everything. They claim that almost all world history before the year 1600 was deliberately falsified for political reasons.
Deliberately falsified. By whom?
By a conspiracy of 16th and 17th century Western European scholars, humanists, and clergy people like Joseph Scaliger, who developed the conventional chronology, and Dionysius Petavius.
And these people supposedly
Fabricated vast amounts of historical documents, created ancient histories wholesale, attributed texts to non-existent ancient authors, and systematically destroyed any real documents that contradicted their fabricated timeline.
That's a conspiracy of truly epic proportions, spanning countries, centuries, involving countless people, all keeping it secret.
It implies a massive, coordinated, and incredibly successful deception. And this is, understandably, one of the biggest sticking points for mainstream historians. The level of collusion required seems almost impossible, and the motivation unclear beyond a vague desire to inflate the importance of antiquity or serve certain political agendas.
So despite this fundamental rejection by academia, how has the new chronology been received more broadly?
It's had significant popular success, especially in Russia. The books have reportedly sold over 1 million copies there.
1 million copies, so it clearly resonates with some people?
Absolutely. It's been praised by some figures, like the writer Alexander Zinoviev mentioned in the outline, as a major scientific breakthrough. It taps into nationalist sentiments sometimes by portraying Russia as the center of a vast ancient empire whose history was suppressed by the West.
But the academic counter-reaction is strong.
Extremely strong. You have prominent Russian scholars like Valentin Yanin, a leading archaeologist of medieval Novgorod, comparing Fomenko's work to the sleight-of-hand trickery of a David Copperfield. Just smoke and mirrors, essentially.
Strong words.
And international scholars, too. The Dutch astronomer H.G. van Buren reviewed it and called it absolutely worthless, even comparing it to politically motivated tendentious science from the early Soviet era.
So a huge gulf between popular appeal in some quarters and near universal condemnation from relevant academic experts.
That's the situation.
Yeah.
A highly detailed, internally consistent, but radically alternative view of the past on one side.
And on the other, the established methods and consensus of history, archaeology, astronomy, physics, all saying, no, the evidence just doesn't support this.
A stark contrast indeed.
So wrapping this up, what do we take away from this deep dive into Fomenko and Nosovskiy's new chronology? It's been quite a journey.
It really has. We've explored this incredibly audacious, detailed alternative history they've constructed, one where millennia of accepted history just collapse into a few centuries.
Yeah, where figures like Tamerlane are radically reimagined, where empires we see as distinct were supposedly one, where even fundamental religious narratives are questioned. It's built on redefining terms, finding patterns, identifying these alleged phantom duplicates.
And it all hinges on this claim of a massive, deliberate falsification of the past.
But then, on the other side, we have the overwhelming consensus of mainstream academia, historians, scientists, archaeologists.
Right, pointing to what they see as fundamental flaws in the methodology, selective data, rejection of established dating techniques like carbon dating and tree rings, astronomical arguments that don't hold up to scrutiny.
And ultimately calling it pseudo-history, inconsistent with the vast body of evidence that supports the conventional timeline.
So it leaves us, and you listening, with this core tension. How do we evaluate such radically different claims about the past?
Exactly. When sources seem to contradict, when interpretations clash so dramatically, how do you draw the line between what we can reasonably call settled history and what remains highly speculative, maybe even fictional?
It's a fundamental question about how we know what we know about the past.
And maybe, just maybe, the way we react to theories like the new chronology, whether we embrace them, reject them outright, or engage critically, tells us something interesting about our own relationship with history and the kinds of stories we want to believe about where we came from.
Definitely something to think about long after this discussion ends.